Hey everyone, it's Wednesday, time for Wisdom Wednesday. Today I thought we would talk a little bit about circadian rhythm and our circadian clock and ways that we can utilize the information that we know and understand about our circadian rhythm to help mitigate any issues with the issues that come about when we travel internationally and change multiple time zones and have to deal with jet lag. And so prior to really getting into a protocol of how we can use light and melatonin, I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about the circadian rhythm. It's a biologic process that goes up and down over a 24-hour period, and it's driven by this internal clock that is located in an area in the brain in the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And this area receives information from light that comes in and from light from the dark times, and processes that and sets up a rhythm that basically is fairly universal for most folks. What we know about that circadian clock is that generally melatonin secretion stops early in the morning. We have a very sharp rise in blood pressure around 6:45 or so, and that's because cortisol, which is one of our major hormones, really starts to begin rising around 4:30, 5 o'clock and peaks around 8 o'clock and then falls off for the rest of the day. But cortisol is really important for allowing our bodies to be set up so that we can go from a supine position to standing without losing consciousness, because it's really important to be able to get our heart pumping blood up to our brain after having been in a supine position. And once that gets our day going, it falls and melatonin then secretion stops. Men will notice that they have their highest testosterone levels in the morning. This is part of that circadian rhythm. We are very alert earlier in the morning. By 10 o'clock, that tends to begin to diminish, but we're better coordinated around 2:30 or so. We have the fastest reaction time, generally around 3:30. Around 5 o'clock, greatest cardiovascular efficiency and muscle strength, and highest blood pressure is around 6:30, 7 o'clock, highest body temperature. That's why we see generally fevers that occur generally reach peak levels around 4 to 7 p.m. Melatonin secretion starts around 9 to 10 o'clock, and we have our deepest sleep around 2 in the morning and our lowest body temperature around 4:30 in the morning. So this is a typical circadian rhythm that occurs. And one of the things that we want to see happen when we travel multiple time zones is that we want to shift that circadian clock that generally runs from, say, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. in a general way. We want to shift it up, say, 6 hours. One of the easiest ways to kind of look at that, and we'll do that in just a minute, kind of that calculation is going, say, from Dallas to London is about a 6-hour shift. And so, one way we can do that is utilizing light therapy as well as melatonin, and I'll kind of walk you through that. It's also important to understand that this circadian rhythm is involved in this sleep-wake cycle. It's involved in our body temperature. It's involved in melatonin production and cortisol production. All of those things are happening. We kind of walked through that. And when you disrupt it by traveling internationally, or a lot of folks with shift work, I know when I was a resident, one of the worst months of my life, I would work 16 hours on, 24 hours off. So I was always shifting my clock that whole month. I would go in at 7 in the morning, off at 11 at night. I'd go in at 11 at night the next night and come work throughout the evening and come home at 3 in the afternoon, get 24 hours off, go back at 3 in the afternoon, and then come home at 7. And that whole shift type work starts over again. It was just miserable. It was not a fun time at all. So shift work can be very challenging. I know a lot of nurses that work at night, work 3 nights on and off 4 nights. It just can be very disruptive for these rhythms that are very powerful in our body. And this exposure to light at night, we know that our phones now have a blue blocker at night, and blocking blue light can be very helpful, and especially in people who just don't sleep well. So it's important when you understand this rhythm to try to keep that in mind and keep that rhythm in sync by sticking to regular sleep hours, by exposing yourself to sunlight in the morning, trying to avoid a lot of light exposure at night, and trying to get regular exercise to kind of help regulate that circadian rhythm as well. So jet lag is something that can really be a problem, and we can try to we have some protocols and some ideas about ways that you can help mitigate these issues. It's really important to try to avoid, obviously, alcohol and caffeine before flying. It's important to stay hydrated. You want to try to get some exercise, try to keep some movement going. You can wear masks and earplugs and try to get sleep on a flight. And we'll talk about ways we can use melatonin. You don't want to eat a lot of heavy meals, and avoid a lot of napping, and making sure that you work on light therapy at times that are appropriate. So let's just say that you want to travel from Dallas to England and to London. That's a 6-hour time difference. So you want to shift that circadian clock over and advance it 6 hours. So considering that our light starts, particularly now, around 6 in the morning, what you would do is you would begin, say, 3 or 4 days prior to travel, wear dark glasses and don't expose your lights or minimize the light exposure to your eyes from about 6 to noon. And then you want to start light exposure. And you want to continue light exposure up through the time that you would go to bed, but as much light exposure as you can throughout the evening, and then avoiding light exposure again the next morning. So when you get up, you want to avoid light exposure. So you want light exposure, let's say, from noon to midnight. And of course, you're going to then go to bed. And again, when you wake up, you want to try to minimize that light exposure until noon the next day, just for a few days before you travel. And you then also would take melatonin around 6 p.m. Dallas time for those 3 nights before you travel. 3 days, yes, so around 6 p.m. you would take your melatonin. And then when you get to London, after flying, you would take melatonin, say 5 milligrams of melatonin, at a normal bedtime, say from 10 to midnight London time. And then you can reduce that once you get settled, but that would at least allow you to use both light and melatonin to help reset that circadian clock. Now, coming back westward, not quite so challenging for most folks. And I know that when I did a recent trip to London about a year ago, I was just there for 2 days, so it was a really quick trip. So going over it was a little challenging, but coming back really wasn't so bad. I flew from 9 a.m. in the morning and I landed in Dallas at noon. And I was able to go to bed fairly quickly and really had a fairly minimal challenge coming back to Dallas. It's usually going the other direction that's so hard, and it takes 2 or 3 days to get settled in. But when you come back, same thing. You avoid bright light starting 6 hours, say you take 8 to 10 p.m. London time or wherever you are, and you subtract the number of hours rather than adding them. So again, you're trying to delay that. So you want to expose to bright light, say from 8 in the afternoon and until you go to bed, and then you avoid bright light from the morning, you take 6 to 8 a.m. say and subtract the 6 hours there, and that's when you avoid the bright light. But you expose yourself to light as much as you can before going to bed. And so using both of these, it seems to work really well, trying to shift that circadian clock one way or the other, either trying to minimize exposure to light or enhance light based on where you're going and the time frame that you have as far as travel is concerned. So hopefully that's helped. Light as well as melatonin can be very beneficial to help minimize jet lag, and just understand that what you're trying to do is shift your circadian clock, either advancing it or delaying it depending on which direction you're going. Hope you all have a great summer. Hope you all enjoy traveling. We know that there's a lot more travel happening and going across to Europe and to Asia. And so just kind of do some of those little calculations, and hopefully you can find a way to make the travel and the initial days when you arrive to be a lot easier for you. You all have a great summer. We'll talk again next week.